You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of precision.
Right, yeah. It feels very clinical.
Exactly. It feels almost like engineering. I mean,
Yeah.
you fall off your bike, your arm swells up, and you go to the clinic.
You want a clear answer.
Yeah. The doctor who puts you in that LAD machine, pulls up the x-ray, points to that jagged little white line on the screen and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
It's incredibly comforting, honestly, because it's binary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's either broken or it's not.
Right.
The solution is clear. Put a cast on it, wait 6 weeks, and you are healed. We crave that kind of visibility.
Yeah.
We desperately want our problems to be categorized, labeled, and physically fixable.
But then, you step out of the physical realm and into the world of sociological and psychological health, and suddenly it's like that x-ray machine has completely short-circuited.
Oh, completely. It's a mess.
You can't just scan a society. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, murky doesn't even begin to cover it. It feels like we are trying to diagnose a ghost.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because when you are dealing with the collective mood of hundreds of millions of people, you don't get a jagged white line.
Yeah, there's no single fracture.
Right. You get a feeling. You get a shift in behavior. You get a sudden, inexplicable drop in institutional trust. It's much harder to point at a screen and say, there it is. That's why everyone is so incredibly angry and exhausted.
Okay, let's unpack this because that is exactly where we are going today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are listening to this right now, you are part of an incredibly bizarre, wildly confusing moment in human history. We're looking at a fascinating, highly detailed sociological and historical reflection dated August 16th, 2026.
Yeah, the document is called 2020's growingpains.pdf, and it is incredibly thorough.
It really is. And the core question we are tackling today, the mission of this deep dive, is one that I think has crossed almost everyone's mind late at night when the house is quiet and, the glow of the phone is the only light in the room.
Which is, are we living through a Great Depression?
Exactly. Because let's be honest, people are feeling politically polarized, financially terrified, and just utterly exhausted by the future. So is this 1929 all over again, or is it something entirely different?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the historical and economic data immediately answers that core question with a very firm no.
A firm no.
Right, but then it introduces a massive, undeniable caveat. Materially, economically, this is absolutely not the 1930s.
Yeah.
But psychologically,
That's a different story.
it's a completely different story.
Yeah.
The researchers frame what we are experiencing not as a Great Depression, but as a great disorientation.
Wow. Great disorientation. That hits differently. It feels more accurate to the dizzying sensation of just walking through the 2020s.
It does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at what the 1930s actually were. I mean, that was a 10 out of 10 material crisis.
Complete collapse.
By 1933, you had 25% unemployment in the United States. You had a catastrophic 26% drop in gross domestic product. It was a literal, physical collapse of economic production. The banking system just evaporated overnight.
You're talking about literal breadlines. People wandering the country looking for farm work just to put a single meal in their stomach.
Precisely.
Oh.
Now, contrast that with the mid-2026 data we are analyzing today from the source.
Okay, what does that look like?
The U.S. economy is actually growing. It grew at a 1.5% annualized rate in the second quarter.
Right.
Unemployment is hovering around a very manageable 4.1%. So on a scale of material crisis, where the 1930s is at 10, today might be, a 4 or 5.
We have supply chain hiccups and inflation struggles, sure, but the factories haven't shuttered and the crops haven't turned to dust.
Exactly. But why does the vibe feel so horrific? Because if you look at the psychological despair metrics in this research, the 2020s are registering as an 8 out of 10 on the despair scale.
An 8 out of 10?
Yeah, and a staggering 10 out of 10 for information chaos.
So this raises a massive question. How can we be materially okay but psychologically devastated?
It all comes down to the architecture of the human mind, really, and how it processes stability.
And if you are listening on your commute or, washing the dishes right now, and you've been feeling this deep, unsettling anxiety in the pit of your stomach.
That ambient dread.
Yes, that dread. If you feel like you have a job, you have a smartphone in your pocket, you have a fridge humming in the kitchen full of food, but the world outside your window feels like it is completely and irreversibly unraveling. You aren't crazy.
You're really not. Your brain is reacting to a very real, measurable phenomenon.
So to understand why the 2020s feel so heavy despite these strong economic indicators, We have to look at the one psychological mechanism we actually do share with the 1930s.
Because the hardware of the human brain hasn't changed in the last 90 years.
Right, the scapegoat mechanism. This part of the research completely shifted how I view my own news feed.
It's a very predictable, almost biological pipeline. It starts with a spike in uncertainty.
And we've had plenty of that.
Oh, tons. And that uncertainty, if left unresolved, it ferments into chronic anxiety. When people are chronically anxious, they experience a massive loss of institutional trust.
They stop believing the system works.
They stop believing that the people flying the plane actually know how to fly the plane.
They look at the cockpit and think, nobody is at the controls and we're losing altitude.
And that realization is terrifying. So it leads to a desperate, clawing desire for simple explanations for very complex structural problems.
Which inevitably leads to the creation of scapegoats.
You find a singular villain, and finally, that psychological need for a singular villain paves the way for charismatic leaders who promise absolute certainty. You know, the whole "I alone can fix it, I know who is to blame" mentality.
It's like the human brain is a circuit board. And right now that circuit board is overheating from processing complex, highly structural, invisible problems.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about it. Municipal zoning laws preventing housing construction. Fragile global supply chains relying on a single canal in Egypt. Algorithmic feeds manipulating dopamine. Massive demographic shifts as populations age.
There's just too much invisible data.
Exactly. It's too much for our Paleolithic brains to process. So hitting the scapegoat button is a way to forcefully reboot the system. It's a cognitive shortcut.
It is.
It is so much easier for my overheating brain to say this specific group of people is the villain than it is to sit down and understand the intricacies of municipal zoning codes and interest rate hikes.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. The circuit board forcefully rebooting to save itself from a meltdown. And the research actually lists the modern scapegoats that are being generated by this exact overheating dynamic.
Who are they?
Well, depending entirely on where you sit politically, culturally, or geographically, your brain's chosen villain might be immigrants, or could be billionaires, the coastal elites, China, the concept of late-stage capitalism.
The list goes on.
Yeah. Woke people, Manguier voters, artificial intelligence, boomers hoarding wealth, or Gen Z refusing to work. The menu of scapegoats is endless.
We really need to pause here, though, and be crystal clear to maintain total objectivity because the research makes a critical nuance.
Yes, very important.
We are not saying that these forces like AI or globalization or immigration have zero impact. They do cause genuine, measurable, localized disruptions.
Absolutely. AI really does eliminate or radically transform certain administrative jobs.
Right.
Globalization really did gut specific manufacturing communities in the Midwest, while disproportionately benefiting tech hubs.
So the scapegoating doesn't mean the issue is entirely shake. The scapegoating happens when people collapse a massively complex, interconnected global system into a single, simplistic villain.
Exactly. It's when the internal narrative becomes this one specific group or this one single technology is the absolute sole reason why my entire life feels bad.
It's the psychological simplification that is so deeply reminiscent of the 1930s, the refusal of complexity.
But what is alarming is the hard data showing that this disorientation, this constant state of overheating, is causing massive, measurable distress.
We aren't just talking about people being grumpy on the internet, are we?
No, not at all. A Gallup report from early 2026 shows that 19.1% of U.S. adults stated they currently had or were being treated for clinical depression.
Wait, 19.1%?
Yeah. And that is up almost 9 full percentage points since they started tracking it in 2015.
That implies millions of people crossing the threshold into clinical depression in just a decade.
Millions. And among U.S. high schoolers, the data from 2023 showed about 40% reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness.
Wow, 40% of kids.
Now, obviously, we are much better at diagnosing and talking about mental health now than we were in the past. Someone in 1955 might have just called it a bout of nerves or, drank a little too much scotch to cope.
Right, so part of the rise is better reporting.
Sure, but the baseline elevation in distress is incredibly real.
Which brings up this bizarre paradox that the research highlights. The national versus personal disconnect.
This is one of the most fascinating psychological splits we've ever recorded.
Yeah.
If you look at Federal Reserve surveys, large majorities of Americans describe their own personal financial situation as okay or comfortable.
Like they can pay their bills, they have a little savings.
Yeah. Yet those exact same individuals in the exact same surveys state that society at large is utterly doomed.
It's totally schizophrenic. I mean, in 1932, people felt society was doomed because they were literally facing starvation and bank failures that had wiped out their life savings.
Their personal reality matched the national reality.
Exactly. Today, people feel society is doomed while they are sitting on a comfortable couch in a climate-controlled room, ordering gourmet sushi on a food delivery app, and watching high-definition streaming video.
The cognitive dissonance is staggering.
It really is.
It's a crisis of orientation, not a crisis of absolute material deprivation. We have lost the plot of what the future is supposed to look like.
Which leads to a really interesting historical challenge. If we aren't exactly in the 1930s and the economic conditions don't match, what historical map can we actually use to understand where we are? Are we just flying totally blind?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The analysis essentially builds the 2020s out of historical parts. It's like Frankenstein's decade.
Frankenstein's decade, I love that.
The researchers argue there isn't a literal 100-year clock where history just repeats itself on a strict calendar. It's not 1929 just because almost a century has passed.
Right, history doesn't care about our base 10 calendar system.
Exactly. Instead, there's a predictable sequence of human behavior that triggers whenever new technology disrupts old wealth, and our institutions lag behind.
So if we look at the historical rhymes, let's start with the 1890s to the 1920s, the Gilded Age. How does this era map onto what we are seeing with modern tech leaders?
The line is incredibly direct. Think about the late 19th and early 20th century. You have figures like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan.
The massive industrial titans.
Yes. They were controlling transformative, general-purpose technologies that completely rewired human existence. Railroads, mass electricity, the telegraph, Standard Oil.
And today?
Today, the names are Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and they are controlling the modern equivalents: the global internet infrastructure, commercialized space, artificial intelligence.
So the rhyme is the anxiety over concentrated power.
Exactly. The underlying anxiety is identical. It's the societal panic over a handful of unelected individuals controlling the very infrastructure of the future.
I see.
In both eras, you have a radically new technological order producing enormous, unfathomable wealth, and the government institutions simply cannot regulate it or understand it fast enough.
The law moves at the speed of paper, while the technology moves at the speed of light, or in the 1890s, the speed of electricity.
Precisely. But the societal shock isn't just about billionaires. The analysis moves to the 1910s and introduces this concept of shock convergence.
Shock convergence. Okay, let's do a little thought experiment here.
Let's do it.
Imagine you are a person born in the year 1880. By the time you hit your 40s, you have lived through the invention of the airplane, mass electrification of your city, a literal global mechanized world war, unprecedented waves of mass immigration, the women's suffrage movement fundamentally upending traditional gender norms, the violent Russian Revolution, and the 1918 influenza pandemic.
Just an overwhelming list.
It's a staggering, almost violent amount of change for a human brain to process in a few short decades.
It would have made the world of 1920 psychologically unrecognizable compared to the world of your childhood in 1880. You would feel like an alien on your own planet.
And what's fascinating here is how seamlessly this maps onto someone born around 1980, an older millennial today.
Oh, wow. Let's trace that. Born in 1980.
Yeah, think about it. If you were born in 1980, your childhood was analog. You had cassette tapes and landlines.
Right.
Then you experienced the rise of personal computers. Then the dawn of the internet. Then smartphones fundamentally changing human interaction. The profound geopolitical shock of 9/11. Massive globalization altering the workforce. The 2008 global financial crash. A global COVID pandemic. And now, the dawn of generative artificial intelligence.
The psychological shock of multiple massive historical forces arriving simultaneously is identical. It's that perpetual feeling of whiplash.
You know, it's like, I just figured out how to use the internet to buy airline tickets, and now my phone is talking to me, passing the bar exam, and generating photorealistic video out of thin air.
We haven't had a single decade to just catch our breath.
Exactly.
But despite the Gilded Age monopolies and the 1910s shock convergence, the analysis points to one specific era as the absolute strongest historical twin to the 2020s.
Ooh.
It gives it an 8.5 out of 10 resemblance, the 1970s.
The 1970s, wait, not the 1930s or the Gilded Age, but the era of disco and gas lines. Why?
Because both the 1970s and the 2020s share a very specific psychological hangover. They both directly followed eras of extreme, almost utopian societal optimism.
Ah, the boom times.
Right. Think about the post-WWII boom of the 1950s and the space age 1960s. Americans were largely taught to expect endless progress, perpetually rising living standards, and basic government competence. We went to the moon. We could do anything.
And then the 70s hit like a brick wall.
Vietnam turned into a quagmire. The Watergate scandal shattered trust in the presidency. You had oil embargoes creating massive energy crises, stagflation, and the painful beginnings of deindustrialization in the Rust Belt.
So that mid-century optimism violently shattered.
Yes, and the exact same psychological arc happened to us. The 1990s and the early 2010s were defined by an intense tech utopianism.
Oh, absolutely. We truly believed the internet was going to seamlessly connect the world, automatically spread democracy, and make everyone wildly rich. Globalization was viewed as a permanent engine of peace.
And now in the 2020s, that utopian dream has become incredibly messy, fragmented, and weaponized.
The contrast the researchers draw between the defining sentiments of these decades clarifies so much. Let's look at the national moods.
Sure.
In the 1930s, the mood was, the system has collapsed. The banks are gone. The farms are dust. In the 1970s, the mood was, the system exists, but something has gone badly wrong with the people running it.
And today?
Today, in the 2020s, the mood is completely novel. The system exists, but nobody agrees on what's wrong with it, and nobody has any idea what replaces it.
Which perfectly captures this free-floating malaise. I mean, people in 1976 weren't generally starving in the streets. They bought suburban homes, they went on family vacations, they watched television. Materially, they were functioning.
Right.
But there was this widespread, heavy pessimism about the direction of the entire country. They felt the American dream was slipping out of reach. That emotional resonance between the 70s and today is incredibly strong.
Okay, I have to push back here because this comparison feels incomplete. Well, in the 1970s, you had, what, 3 major TV networks? Everyone watched Walter Cronkite at 6:30 p.m. Everyone read roughly the same national newspapers.
That's true.
Whether you were a factory worker in Ohio or a banker in New York, you generally operated within a shared objective reality. Today, we have hyper-customized algorithmic feeds.
Yeah.
My phone shows me a completely different version of reality than what your phone shows you. Doesn't that entirely break the 1970s comparison?
I agree with you, and that is precisely the limit of the 1970s model. It is the crucial deviation.
I
The
see.
1970s suffered from a profound distrust in the leaders running the system. But in the 2020s, we have added a terrifying new layer. We are no longer sure there is even a common reality through which we can judge the system.
We don't just disagree on the solutions.
We disagree on the basic facts of what is happening.
And that lack of shared reality brings us to the absolute core of today's deep dive. If it's not a Great Depression, and it's not a perfect repeat of the 1970s, what is the actual diagnosis?
The researchers use a very specific sociological term here, anomie.
Anomie.
Yes, it's a concept developed by Emil Durkheim, a foundational sociologist.
It's a heavy academic word, but the way I process it is like, imagine you are sitting down with your family to play a complex board game.
Okay.
Suddenly, half the players start using the rules from Monopoly, rolling dice and buying properties, and the other half start playing by the rules of chess, moving knights and bishops.
Total chaos.
You don't just lose the game, you literally do not know how to take your next turn. The fundamental rules of engagement have dissolved. That's what it feels like to navigate the internet or buy a house or look for a job right now. The old rules broke before the new ones were written.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Anomie is the anxiety of rulelessness. And the research breaks this modern anomie down into 5 specific, unique psychological conditions. 5 modern depressions that are afflicting the public mind.
Let's spend some real time on these because I think this is going to explain so much about how you, the listener, are feeling right now.
The first one is what they call epistemic depression, or information chaos.
Epistemic meaning relating to knowledge.
Right. If we look at the 20th century, the model of propaganda or information control was essentially authoritarian. The state or the dominant culture said, here is the one official truth, believe it or else.
It was a monopoly on information.
But the 21st century information crisis is the exact inverse. The model is now, here are 10,000 competing truths, all with slick production values, all claiming to be authentic. Good luck figuring out which one is real.
The researchers actually back this up with a 2025 Pew survey showing that 80% of Americans believe voters can't even agree on basic facts about important issues.
80%.
Yeah, and that's the distinction. Not that they disagree on policy regarding taxes or healthcare. They disagree on what is physically, objectively real in the world.
Which leads to a condition sociologists call epistemic nihilism. When you live in an environment where AI can generate a flawless, convincing video of a politician saying something they never said.
Which happens every day now.
Exactly. Where every scientific article seems to have a hidden corporate funding source, where you constantly have to ask who fact-checks the fact-checkers. Eventually, the human brain's cognitive load just maxes out.
You just give up. Epistemic helplessness. That phrase from the text gave me chills. You throw your hands in the air and say, everyone is lying, everything is a grift, everything has a hidden agenda.
And this raises an important point about modern propaganda.
Hmm.
Authoritarians and demagogues today don't actually need you to believe their specific lies.
They don't.
No, they just need to pump enough noise and contradiction into the system that you stop believing that objective truth is discoverable at all. If nothing is true, then power is the only thing that matters.
Wow. That leads directly into the second condition, future depression.
Yeah,
The contrast made here is so poignant.
it really is.
Think about a working-class person in 1955. Maybe they worked a grueling job on an assembly line. They didn't have much money, they didn't take fancy vacations. But there was this bedrock belief that if they worked hard, their kids would go to college and have a fundamentally better, easier life. The future was an upward trajectory.
Now overlay that with today. You have a relatively comfortable person in 2026. They are sitting in a nice apartment sipping a $6 latte,
Right.
but they look at the cascading effects of climate change. They look at artificial intelligence threatening white-collar work. They look at a housing market where starter homes cost $500,000. And they don't feel upward trajectory. They feel like they're just bracing for impact.
The future is no longer a destination we are excitedly progressing toward. It is a threat we are hoping to survive.
It's a depression of the future horizon. When you lose the promise of the future, the present becomes incredibly difficult to endure, no matter how comfortable your couch is.
Which connects to the third condition, and this one really explains the exhaustion of social media, the agency crisis.
The agency crisis is the psychological torture of the modern newsfeed. Over the last 20 years, we have dramatically, exponentially increased our awareness of global suffering. But we haven't increased our agency, our actual ability to fix that suffering, by a single inch.
Think about it like a medieval farmer. If you lived in 1400, your worldview was your village. You worried if your crops would fail or if the local lord would raise taxes.
Local problems.
Yes, your problems were localized, and crucially, your actions mattered. You could work harder, you could store more grain. But today, it's like someone gave that medieval farmer a cursed magic mirror.
A magic mirror, right?
And this mirror forces him to watch a brutal famine happening 2,000 miles away and a massive hurricane destroying a city 5,000 miles away, all while he tries to eat his breakfast. And he can't do a single thing to stop any of it.
That analogy perfectly captures the biological burden. Your brain is reacting to a 247 stream of existential threats, pumping cortisol and adrenaline into your system. But you have no outlet for that biological response.
You can vote every few years, you can recycle your cardboard, you can donate $20 to a charity.
But the massive structural systems driving these crises, global carbon emissions, AI algorithms, international proxy wars, they operate entirely above your individual influence. You are hyper-informed about impending doom over which you have almost zero control. It produces a profound, paralyzing helplessness.
Then there's the fourth depression, which they call institutional loneliness. And I appreciate that the researchers make a very clear distinction here. This isn't just about introverts needing to go outside and make more friends.
No, it's structural. It's about the death of what sociologists call intermediate structures.
What are those exactly?
Well, for most of modern history, the individual didn't stand alone against the massive state or the massive economy. There were intermediate structures that anchored you to your community.
Like what?
Strong labor unions, deeply rooted neighborhood associations, highly attended religious congregations, thriving local newspapers, fraternal organizations. These were the glue.
Robert Putnam wrote about this decades ago in Bowling Alone, right? The collapse of civic life.
Exactly. And the digital revolution accelerated that collapse. The researchers include this incredibly memorable quote that summarizes the entire modern social condition. You can have 500 followers and nobody who would help you move a couch.
Wow, that is brutally, painfully accurate. Digital life provides contact, but community requires obligation.
That is the dividing line. Obligation. A follower on a social platform doesn't have an obligation to help you pack boxes into a U-Haul on a rainy Saturday morning.
No, they just hit a like button.
Right. A member of your local union or your church congregation historically did. We've traded deep, inconvenient, obligating ties for shallow, frictionless digital contact. And human beings cannot thrive on frictionless contact. We need to be needed.
And that frictionless digital world creates the fifth and final condition, attention or status depression.
This one is rooted deeply in evolutionary psychology. Historically, humanity suffered from absolute scarcity. You were worried about getting enough calories to survive the winter. Today, in the developed world, we suffer from unfiltered abundance. There are more prestige television shows than you could watch in a lifetime. There are more podcasts, more opinions, more consumer choices than the human brain can filter. The sheer volume of abundance creates chronic decision fatigue.
But the status part of it is what really breaks the brain. If you lived in a tribe of 150 people 10,000 years ago, your brain evolved to figure out your social status within that very small group. Are you a good hunter? Are you a respected elder?
Exactly.
Even 50 years ago, your comparison group was the people on your suburban street. Did your neighbor buy a slightly nicer Ford?
But today, you open a social media app, and the algorithm doesn't show you the average people on your street. It shows you the most exceptional, the most beautiful, the most wealthy, and the most fiercely successful people on the entire planet.
Right in your living room.
Your primitive brain is suddenly trying to calculate its status against billionaires on yachts in Dubai
Yeah.
and 22-year-old fitness influencers in Bali.
So the result is that someone making a very solid, comfortable living can feel deeply impoverished. Someone who is perfectly attractive and healthy can feel horribly inadequate and ugly. Their brain is constantly processing the top 0.01% of humanity as their peer group.
Material prosperity in the real world is objectively high, but relative satisfaction completely plummets.
When you combine all five of these, the epistemic chaos where nothing is true, the future anxiety where progress is a threat, the agency crisis of knowing everything but fixing nothing, the institutional loneliness of having no structural support, and the crushing status comparison, you get the great disorientation.
But wait, we can't talk about all this disorientation without talking about the single largest, most disruptive force acting as an accelerant on all five of these conditions.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Right. And this brings us to a massive shift in the analysis. AI isn't just a tech story. It's not just an economic story about efficiency. The researchers frame AI as a profound philosophical crisis. It is a direct threat to human identity. So what does this all mean?
To understand why AI feels so different from past technology, the author makes a crucial distinction about what is actually being replaced.
Okay.
Previous technological revolutions were about replacing human muscle or physical endurance. The steam engine, the mechanization of agriculture, electrification. A forklift replaces the need for 20 strong men to lift heavy pallets in a warehouse. It takes away physical labor.
And humans were generally okay with giving up backbreaking physical labor.
Exactly. But generative AI is entirely different. It replaces cognition. It reaches directly into the occupations and the skills that people have spent centuries associating with high intelligence, advanced education, and core human identity.
So it isn't coming for the forklift drivers.
No, it's coming for the writers, the software coders, the graphic designers, the paralegals, the medical diagnosticians. It creates widespread competence anxiety.
Competence anxiety, the fear that the thing I am best at, the thing that defines my value to society, is suddenly obsolete. And the researchers argue this borders on the theological. I mean, for centuries, human beings have been forced to surrender our claims to uniqueness. Galileo told us we aren't the physical center of the universe. Darwin told us we are products of biological evolution, just like the apes.
Right.
But through all of that, we always held fiercely onto our minds, our creativity, our logic, our ability to synthesize ideas. That was our divine spark.
And now, if a machine model trained on data can write a genuinely beautiful, moving poem in 3 seconds, what does that mean for human creativity?
That's a scary thought.
If you can read an MRI scan and diagnose a rare disease with 5% better accuracy than a human doctor who went to school for 12 years, what is the value of human expertise? Right. AI asks a brutal, fundamental question. If machines can outthink us, what exactly makes humans special?
That is the existential depression of AI, the deep late-night dread. But the analysis doesn't just stay in the philosophical clouds. It highlights a very immediate, highly structural depression caused by AI, specifically impacting younger generations right now.
They call it the broken apprenticeship ladder.
Yes. If you look at the Gen Z employment data, it's startling. The researchers cite New York Fed data from the second quarter of 2026 showing underemployment for recent college graduates sitting at a staggering 42%.
Almost half of recent grads working jobs that don't require their degree.
Why?
The author analyzes this through the lens of the AI apprenticeship problem. Think about how a junior lawyer or a junior software coder, or an entry-level architect historically learned their trade over the last 50 years.
They started at the bottom.
They got a job at a firm, and for the first 3 to 5 years, they did the routine, highly repetitive, frankly boring work.
The grunt work. Summarizing case law documents, writing boilerplate lines of code, resizing images, doing basic data entry.
Precisely. They did the grunt work, and the firm paid them a junior salary. But while they were doing that work, they were getting the reps in, they were learning the rhythms of the industry, they were being mentored.
And now, enter generative AI.
Yes. AI is currently fantastic at doing exactly that routine boilerplate work. It can summarize 50 legal briefs in 10 seconds for fractions of a penny.
So the firm realizes they don't need to hire 5 junior lawyers. They hire 1 senior lawyer who uses an AI agent to do the work of the juniors.
But here's the structural collapse. If the machines are doing all the junior work because it is vastly cheaper and faster, how does a human being ever get the years of practice required to become a senior expert?
This is terrifying. It's exactly like removing the minor leagues from professional baseball.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
You bulldoze all the minor league stadiums to save money, but you still somehow expect 22-year-old rookies to just step up to the plate in the World Series, face a 100-mile-per-hour fastball, and hit a home run. You have completely destroyed the training ground.
How do you ever produce a master craftsman if you legally or economically prohibit anyone from being an apprentice?
That is the structural threat facing Gen Z. The bottom rungs of the white-collar career ladder are being sawed off. But and this is where the research completely flips the script. While we are panicking about AI taking all the jobs and destroying the ladder, there is a massive demographic undertow pulling in the exact opposite direction.
The demographic paradox.
When I read this section, it literally stopped me in my tracks. I had to reread the data 3 times. Explain this, because it feels completely counter to everything we are told.
We have spent a decade terrified of the narrative that AI is going to replace human workers. But if you pull back and look at the macro demographic data, the terrifying truth isn't that we have too many humans and not enough jobs.
What is it then?
It's that we are rapidly running out of humans.
Wait, running out of humans? But the global population is still growing, isn't it?
Globally, yes, in certain regions. But in the developed world, the US, Europe, East Asia, the population is aging at an unprecedented rate. The analysis cites Congressional Budget Office projections indicating that starting around 2030, U.S. deaths will systematically exceed U.S. births. Wow.
The boomer generation, which is massive, is moving into their 80s.
Okay, so the population ages. But how does that counter the AI job threat?
Because an aging population requires an astronomical amount of physical, human-centric care and service, while simultaneously removing millions of workers from the active tax base.
Ah.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that to handle this aging wave, the United States will need 766,000 new home health and personal care aides annually.
766,000 new workers every single year. Just to care for the elderly. Where do those workers come from if the birth rate is plummeting?
They don't exist. The math simply does not work. You cannot maintain a high-functioning, high-living standard society with a massive retired population and a shrinking pool of working-age adults to support them. Unless
you radically increase the productivity of the remaining workers.
Exactly. The conclusion the researchers draw is completely counterintuitive to the popular panic. We might not be facing a dystopian future where AI takes all our jobs and we starve.
So what are we facing? We might actually be facing a future where we desperately rely on advanced automation and AI to fill the massive gap left by a shrinking, aging, working-age population. The machines might literally be the only way we maintain our current living standards when there simply aren't enough human beings left to do the work.
That is such a vital reframing. It completely shifts the emotional valence. It moves AI from being this malicious sci-fi job stealer to being a necessary load-bearing crutch for an aging society. We aren't building Skynet to replace us. We're building robotic infrastructure to care for us.
And that profound shift in perspective perfectly transitions us into the final major section of the analysis, the forecast for the future.
Right, the 2030s.
If the 2020s are defined as the Great Disorientation, the researchers project that the 2030s will be the Great Adaptation or the Great Rebalancing.
They actually predict the turbulence and anxiety will drop from an 8 out of 10 down to a manageable 5 or 7 out of 10. But how do we actually cross that bridge? What does 2035 actually look like in this adapted world?
The author paints a very vivid, almost surprisingly mundane picture of 2035. The core prediction is that AI will cease to be terrifying. It will lose its mystical, existential aura and become boring, invisible infrastructure.
Like the internet.
Exactly like the internet. Think back to 1995. The internet was on the cover of every magazine. People were terrified it was going to destroy human interaction, or utopian thinkers believed it would end all wars. It was loud and disruptive.
And now?
By 2015, nobody talked about the internet as a mystical entity. You just walked into a coffee shop and asked, what's the Wi-Fi password?
Yes.
AI will undergo that exact same normalization.
That makes sense.
Generation Beta, the kids who are being born right now, will grow up with AI agents as a default. They will think it is utterly ridiculous and primitive that humans in the 2020s used to sit at a keyboard and manually type out routine emails or spend 3 hours filling out tax forms.
It will be as invisible to them as the electrical grid is to us. We don't marvel at electricity when we flip a light switch, we just expect the room to illuminate. But speaking of the grid, the analysis makes a really sharp point about the physical economy. To support this massive AI infrastructure, the 2030s cannot just be a decade of software. It has to be highly industrial.
This is a major pivot. For the last 25 years, the global economy has been obsessed with the digital, building apps, social networks, software as a service. But AI models require massive amounts of compute power, which requires massive amounts of electricity, which requires massive data centers.
You can't run the future of AI on a fragile power grid.
You can't. So the 2030s are predicted to be an era of heavy physical reality, a renaissance of industrial building, laying thousands of miles of high-capacity copper wiring, upgrading regional electrical grids, deploying next-generation nuclear power plants, manufacturing advanced semiconductors on domestic soil.
We are moving from the ethereal digital world back into the hard physical world of concrete, steel, and uranium.
Which sounds very much like the progressive era that followed the Gilded Age. It was a period of massive physical building and infrastructural regulation.
But if we are talking about physical reality, there is one massive physical asset that is causing more anxiety today than almost anything else: the housing market.
Yes, the great bottleneck of the American dream.
Everyone right now, especially millennials and Gen Z, is feeling the crushing squeeze of $400,000 median home prices paired with punishingly high mortgage rates. It feels impossible. How does the 2030s Great Adaptation actually resolve this?
Once again, demographics step in to change the math. The analysis cites modeling from Freddie Mac regarding the aging boomer population.
What does the modeling say?
Currently, boomers own a massive, disproportionate share of the single-family housing stock, but biology is undefeated. The modeling predicts that by the year 2035, there will be roughly 9.2 million fewer boomer homeowner households, simply due to the realities of aging, mortality, and the necessary transition into assisted living facilities.
9.2 million homes entering the market. That's a staggering amount of inventory.
The researchers are very careful to temper expectations here, though. They point out this won't be a sudden, catastrophic silver tsunami that crashes the housing market overnight and makes homes dirt cheap.
So no housing crash.
Rather, it will be a gradual tide that slowly but inevitably loosens the bottleneck. There will be more churn, more for sale signs in older, established suburban neighborhoods, more supply, slowly meeting the pent-up demand.
But here is the twist, and this is where the sociological analysis gets incredibly perceptive and honestly a bit dark. The real economic story of the 2030s isn't going to be a clean, triumphant victory of Gen Z finally buying houses from retiring boomers.
No.
The defining economic feature of the next decade will be the inheritance divide.
This is critical. If we connect the housing data to the bigger picture of wealth transfer, we have to realize that the immense wealth accumulated by the boomer generation doesn't just evaporate when they pass away.
It goes somewhere.
It transfers down to the next generation, but it transfers highly unevenly.
Let's walk through the scenario the researchers lay out because it completely redefines class conflict.
Okay.
Imagine two 35-year-olds in the year 2035. We'll call them Person A and Person B. They both went to the same state college. They both work similar mid-level corporate jobs. They both make $85,000 a year. By all traditional income metrics, they are in the exact same socioeconomic class.
But then the generational wealth transfer happens.
Right.
Person A's parents pass away, and Person A inherits a house that was bought in 1995 for $150,000 and is now fully paid off and worth $600,000. They sell it.
So suddenly, Person A has a massive influx of capital. They can drop a huge down payment on their own home, instantly wipe out the remainder of their student debt, and fully fund their retirement accounts. Their financial anxiety vanishes overnight.
Now look at Person B. Person B's parents were renters, or they suffered a massive medical emergency in their 70s that wiped out their equity to pay for end-of-life care. Person B inherits absolutely nothing.
So despite having the exact same salary and the exact same education as person A, person B is still scraping by, still renting, still stressed about grocery bills, and watching the dream of home ownership recede.
The profound structural shift here is that the new class conflict won't be intergenerational. It won't be Gen Z screaming at boomers.
It will be intergenerational.
It will be Gen Z and millennials with family assets fiercely divided from Gen Z and millennials without family assets. Income from your daily labor will matter far less than the capital you inherited.
It's a return to a more aristocratic model of wealth, where your lineage determines your destiny more than your resume. That is a massive political powder keg.
Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most precarious section of this entire analysis, the fork in the road. Because the researchers issue a very stark warning. Historical transitions do not happen automatically, and they certainly don't always end well.
Right. The 1890s Gilded Age transitioned into the Progressive Era, which was relatively stable and built the middle class. But the disruption of the 1920s transitioned into the catastrophic, totalitarian nightmare of the 1930s.
Yes, the path we take out of this great disorientation depends entirely on the resilience of our institutions in the coming years.
And we simply cannot talk about institutional resilience without talking about the political elephant in the room, the upcoming 2028 U.S. presidential election.
And here, we must be exceptionally explicit about what the sociological analysis is actually measuring. The research is not endorsing a specific candidate.
No.
It is not advocating for a political party, and it is not arguing that one specific ideology holds the magical cure. The researchers' focus is entirely 100% on institutional stability, not partisan victory.
That is a vital distinction to make, yes. What does institutional stability actually look like in the data?
The key indicator for whether the 2030s become a successful great adaptation isn't whether the political left or the political right manages to secure the White House in 2028.
What is it then?
The indicator is the mechanics of the system itself. Is there a peaceful transfer or continuation of power? Do the federal and state courts continue to function independently without being dismantled?
Important question.
Do the military and law enforcement remain loyal to the Constitution rather than a faction? And crucially, does the losing electorate, whichever side that is, ultimately accept the legitimate results of the election, even if they are bitterly angry about it?
History shows us that resilient democracies can survive decades of bad fiscal policies, severe economic recessions, and intense cultural polarization. But what they absolutely cannot survive is when massive competing factions stop believing that the democratic system itself is a legitimate way to resolve those disagreements. Once the rules of the game are rejected, the game ends.
Exactly. It's an institutional stability prediction, not a Republican versus Democratic prediction.
Right.
If the underlying framework holds, if the system doesn't shatter under the pressure of the 2028 election, the data suggests we can successfully manage the technological transition of the 2030s. But the researchers note one final wildcard, a scenario that could upend the entire forecast, depending on how society chooses to deploy AI.
The two plausible 2035 AI scenarios, the fork in the road. Walk us through these, because reading them felt like looking at two completely different science fiction novels, but they are both entirely mathematically possible based on the current trajectory.
Let's start with the optimistic path, the good AI 2035 scenario. In this world, our institutions manage to adapt the technology to empower the middle class.
That sounds great.
AI creates profound abundance. One worker augmented by AI can produce the value that three workers used to produce.
Yeah.
But instead of that leading to mass layoffs, it leads to a revitalization of small enterprise.
Because suddenly a three-person small business has the analytical and generative capabilities that used to require a 50-person corporate marketing and legal department.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Healthcare becomes significantly cheaper and incredibly personalized through AI diagnostics that catch diseases years before a human would. Working hours gradually fall as productivity rises, allowing people more time for their communities.
It becomes a massive, widespread leap in human living standards, much like the widespread adoption of electricity ultimately was.
True great adaptation. But then, the researchers map out the alternative. Bad AI 2035.
Here we go.
In Bad AI 2035, the institutions completely fail to regulate or adapt the technology. The entry-level career ladders we talked about earlier don't just break, They completely collapse, locking an entire generation out of professional growth.
Devastating.
Wealth concentrates to obscene extreme levels, hoarding around the tiny fraction of individuals and corporations who own the proprietary AI models and the massive data centers.
The new robber barons.
Yes. In this scenario, synthetic media, the deepfakes and AI-generated propaganda completely destroys whatever tiny shred of informational trust is left in society. Mass digital surveillance becomes universally cheap and ubiquitous.
And the workers.
Perhaps worst of all, human workers might actually see massive productivity gains from using AI, but they see absolutely zero corresponding wage gains. They work just as hard, produce twice as much, and stay just as broke.
It's the exact same core technology. Neural networks, large language models, compute power, but completely different institutional outcomes.
Yes.
It really drives home the central thesis of this entire document. The technology itself isn't destiny. The rules, the laws, and the social contracts we choose to build around the technology are what dictate our destiny.
And that is the true fork in the road. The defining question of the 2020s isn't, are we passively repeating the history of the 1930s? The question is an active one. Which historical exit are we going to intentionally take?
Will we turn this immense technological disruption and this massive demographic pressure into structural reform and abundance? Or will we let the circuit board overheat, turning our anxiety into escalation, scapegoating, and institutional collapse?
That's the challenge.
Okay, we have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today. We've gone from the overheating circuit boards and the scapegoat mechanics of the 1930s to the technological whiplash and shock convergence of the 1910s and the deep system-level malaise of the 1970s.
We really span the decades.
We unpacked the modern anomie, those 5 unique modern depressions: epistemic chaos where truth dies, future anxiety, the torturous lack of agency, the institutional loneliness of a follower-based world, and the crushing status comparison of global algorithmic feeds.
Yeah.
We looked at the philosophical AI existential crisis, the absolute reality of an aging, shrinking human population, and the massive housing and inheritance shifts coming in the 2030s.
If we synthesize all of this data, all of these historical rhymes, the core message of this research is actually deeply empathetic.
Empathetic.
Yes, we're experiencing severe societal-level growing pains. Society is being forcefully dragged into a hyper-connected, hyper-automated world that our Paleolithic brains and our 20th century institutions simply weren't designed for.
You're playing catch-up.
Exactly. Feeling disoriented right now isn't a sign that you are personally broken or crazy. It is a highly natural, completely predictable psychological response to living in the liminal space between 2 massive eras of human history. The old rules of the 20th century are gone, and the new rules of the 21st century haven't been finalized yet.
The mood of a decade always feels permanent while you are trapped inside it. When you are in the thick of the chaos, it feels like it will be this exhausting forever.
But it won't.
No, the long arc of history shows that human beings possess an incredible capacity to eventually normalize the unimaginable. The steam engine, the telegraph, automobiles, the internet, they all caused massive society-wide panic. They destroyed old ways of living. And then eventually we built new rules around them. We adapted. We built a new normal.
We do. And that historical resilience is the foundation for the hope of the great adaptation in the 2030s. We have the capacity to move from disorientation back to orientation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Think back to our opening metaphor about the broken X-ray machine and the muddy waters of society.
Right.
Think about the specific things causing you the most existential dread today: the hyper-realistic deepfakes, the AI agents taking over human tasks, the bizarre, fragmented, algorithmic culture that feels like it's pulling your community apart.
The things keeping you up at night.
Now ask yourself, what if your future children or your grandchildren look at those exact same technologies the way you currently look at a microwave or a traffic light or the Wi-Fi router in your living room? Just boring, invisible background tools.
Very likely.
If history tells us anything at all, it's that the terrifying chaos of today is almost always destined to become the boring, everyday infrastructure of tomorrow. So how much of your current overwhelming anxiety is actually a permanent catastrophe? And how much of it is simply the uncomfortable, messy, deeply human friction of adapting to your future normal?